Put her down. That's all he said. 4 words barely above a whisper. And those 6 riders on horseback had no earthly idea what they'd just walked into, because the woman they'd grabbed off that dusty road was Rena Calloway's daughter. And a man like Silas Calloway doesn't announce himself before he acts. She was standing there in the trail grit, arms burning where they'd yanked her from the road. 6 mounted men circling like vultures finding their angle. She hadn't laid eyes on her father in 9 years. Half the territory still wouldn't speak his name above a murmur. She kept her chin lifted. She kept her breathing steady. 6 horses, 6 guns! One road going nowhere she wanted to be. Then she saw him, standing stone still at the edge of the brush line, barely visible in the heat shimmer rising off the flats. He hadn't reached for his weapon, hadn't raised his voice. Just those 4 words, quiet as a church.
Heavy as iron. If that kind of story pulls at something in you, go ahead and subscribe before we ride any further.
Drop your city in the comments. Let me know how far this tale has traveled. And stay until the very last word, because what happens on that stretch of trail outside Sallow Creek is not something you'll shake loose easily. Now, let's go back. Back to the summer of 1885. Back to the fold of earth where Kansas bled into Indian territory. Back to a place called Sallow Creek, a water stop, a trading post, and maybe 350 people whose primary occupation was keeping their heads down, because looking up too long in that country had a way of costing you something you couldn't afford to lose. The heat that summer was merciless. It rolled in off the flats before sunup and held on past midnight like a debt collector who'd decided to move in. The creek grass had gone yellow by June. By the middle of July, it snapped underfoot the way dried-out hopes do. The horses at the livery stood with their necks slack and their eyes barely open, as though they'd quietly made peace with suffering as a permanent condition. Rena Calloway had not made peace with a single thing. She was 22. Lean and dark-haired, with her mother's careful eyes and a stubbornness bred into her from both sides of a family that had never once found retreating to be an attractive option. She'd arrived in Sallow Creek 8 months prior in the company of a man named Fletcher Dunn, which stood as perhaps the worst judgment call in a life that had already accumulated more than its share of poor ones. Fletcher Dunn was 38, wide across the chest, with a jaw like a courthouse step and light gray eyes that never quite arrived at warmth no matter how hard his expression reached for it. He had money, which in Sallow Creek in 1885 meant he had men, and men with rifles, and a stretch of creek-fed grassland that smaller landholders looked at the way hungry people stare at food through glass. He had a smile that showed up fast and left without closing the door. Rena had spent about 3 weeks mistaking it for genuine before she understood what it actually was. What it was ownership. Wrapped in fine wool and a confident voice, but ownership all the same. By October, she'd stopped pushing back when he corrected her in front of company. By December, she'd stopped looking at the front door the way a caged thing looks at an open window. By spring, she was watching the road out of Sallow Creek the way a bird watches a crack in the ceiling, patient, calculating, waiting. When her chance finally opened up, she took it without hesitation and without regret. She left at 3 in the morning on a Wednesday. A travel bag, a wool blanket, $39 stitched into the lining of a hat box over 6 careful months, and a letter she'd composed in secret to the Territorial Marshal's office in Guthrie. In that letter, written in precise and steady handwriting, she'd outlined every parcel of property Fletcher Dunn had stolen, cheated, or frightened out of his neighbors going back to 1881. She figured that letter would either get her killed or get him locked up. Her plan was to be enough miles down the road by the time anyone read it that it wouldn't matter much which way it went. She made 14 miles before they ran her down. She heard them before she saw them. 6 sets of hooves hammering the hardpan, coming fast from the northeast where the old cattle road cut through the scrub. She didn't run. Running across open ground against mounted men isn't a plan. It's a wish. And Rena Calloway had stopped wasting wishes on things that weren't going to happen. She kept walking. Told herself it might be travelers. Told herself it might be nobody who mattered. Then she heard the voice. Miss Dunn. That was what he said, calling her by Fletcher's name. That told her everything she needed to know about what this was. His name was Cole Birch, Fletcher Dunn's headman. His enforcer, the one who delivered the kind of messages that didn't use words. He was rangy and sun-darkened, with a pale, narrow mustache and the calm, unhurried manner of a man who had spent years watching other people make mistakes and filing the information away. He rode up beside her without rushing. The 5 men behind him fanned into a loose arc, not quite surrounding her yet, but making clear that surrounding her was an available option they'd simply chosen not to use. "Yet, Mr. Dunn would like you to come back home," Birch said. He had the tone of a man explaining something elementary to someone he found vaguely tiresome. "I expect he would," Rena said. "Long way to anywhere from out here." Hot morning for walking. Birch squinted out at the shimmering distance, the pale thread of road unreeling toward the Kansas line. Then he looked back at her. Something shifted in his face that wasn't quite a smile but was related to one. "There's no marshal on his way," he said. "Not today. Not for some time. Mr. Dunn has an understanding with a circuit judge out of Fort Smith that tends to slow certain things down considerably. You follow what I'm telling you?" "I follow," Rena said. She kept her voice flat. 8 months with Fletcher Dunn had taught her that much, at least. "Then let's head back and settle this like sensible people." He reached down from the saddle and closed his hand around her arm, and Rena went cold and still in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. She was thinking about fighting. Measuring it the way her mother had always told her to measure things before committing to them. Tallying what she had against what she was up against. 6 mounted men. A travel bag with $39 and no weapon. 14 miles from town, with the nearest homestead a good 4 miles east. The numbers didn't add up. They never had added up for Rena Calloway, not in her whole life, and she'd fought anyway. More times than she could count. But today she was tired in a way that sleep can't fix. Tired down to the marrow. She was still deciding whether tired and strategic beat brave and broken when she heard the footsteps, slow, even, unhurried, coming, up from the south. A man stepped out of the heat, shimmer where the mesquite grew thick along the creek bank. He was somewhere past 50, lean as fence wire, with a face that had been lived in hard and stored in rough conditions, a face that had spent decades in weather and disputes and worse things than both. He wore a sun-bleached gray hat with a center crease and a canvas duster that had forgotten what color it started out. A single-action Colt rode his right hip, holstered low. His hands hung loose at his sides. He stopped 12 feet from Cole Birch's horse. He looked at Rena. He looked at Birch. He looked at the 5 riders spread behind, and he said 4 words. "Put her down, boys." Birch looked at him the way you look at something that's wandered into the road that you're going to have to step around. "Keep moving, old-timer. This here's a private matter." The man in the gray hat looked at Rena again. Something crossed his face, fast as a cloud shadow, gone just as quick, replaced by that same flat, unhurried steadiness. "I'll ask you once more," he said. "Let the woman go." Birch's jaw went tight. One of the men behind him shifted his weight in the saddle. The arc of horses tightened. The way a hand tightens before it becomes a fist. And Rena Calloway, watching this weathered man in a worn-out duster standing alone in the baking heat against 6 armed riders, felt something stir in her chest that she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long, long time, something she didn't have a name for yet, something that moved through her like the particular quality of stillness she half remembered from her childhood, the stillness her father used to carry into a room before she even knew what that stillness meant, she told herself. She was imagining it. She wasn't. His name was Silas Calloway, and there were men still breathing, fewer than there once had been, but some who would cross to the far side of a street rather than share pavement with him. At different points across his life, he'd been a cavalry scout, a deputy marshal, and the man the marshals sent for when they needed something accomplished that couldn't go into any official report afterward. He was exactly the kind of dangerous that you don't recognize until there's nothing useful you can do with that recognition. He'd been quiet for 9 years. He'd set the gun work aside in 1876 and the year his wife passed. The year he made the worst decision of his life. The year he placed a 7-year-old daughter in the care of his wife's sister in Abilene because he didn't trust himself to raise a child right in the state he was in then. He'd gone up into the breaks of the Cimarron and stayed gone. Ranch work. Fence mending. Odd jobs. Trying to wear himself down into something that could live alongside other people without the violence always crouching just behind his eyes. He'd been doing a decent job of it, all things considered. Then 3 weeks ago, a letter had arrived at the Hendricks spread where he was working summer fencing. Return address from the Methodist Church in Abilene. His wife's sister had passed on. The letter was brief and sorrowful and mentioned, almost as a postscript, that Rena had been in Sallow Creek with a man named Dunn, and that some folks were concerned. Silas had read those 4 words standing beside a fence post he'd just tamped into the earth under the midday sun. He'd folded the letter into his coat pocket, walked back to the bunkhouse, saddled his horse, and hadn't stopped riding until he hit the territory line. He'd been looking for his daughter 11 days when he found her on this road with Cole Birch's hand locked around her arm. He hadn't introduced himself to Birch. He didn't plan to, Mr. Birch said now, and the patience in his voice had gone sharp underneath, the way a blade sounds when it's being unsheathed slowly. I don't know who you believe yourself to be, but you're standing between me and something that's none of your business. This is your last opportunity to ride on. Nice morning for it, Silas said. I've been doing a fair amount of riding lately. One of the men behind Birch let out a short, contemptuous laugh. The kind of laugh that's also a message. Silas turned his head slowly and looked at the man who'd laughed, didn't say a word, just looked. The laugh dried up in the man's throat. Birch went for his revolver. He was quick about it. Silas Calloway was quicker in the way that doesn't read as speed, the way a rattlesnake doesn't appear to be in motion until it's already finished moving. The Colt was out and level, and the hammer was back before Birch's hand had cleared leather, and Silas hadn't shifted his feet or changed the register of his expression by a single degree. You pull that iron, Silas said, and we finish this right here in the dust in a way none of your boys are going to enjoy riding back to report. The 5 riders locked up. Horses stirred. Dust drifted in the heat. Birch's hand hovered frozen at the grip of his revolver. He studied the Colt barrel pointed at the center of his chest. Then he studied the eyes of the man behind it. And something in those eyes made him lift his hand away, slowly. The way you lift your hand from something you've just realized is burning. Who are you? Birch said. A man who's sore from hard riding, Silas said. And I'm asking you one final time to release that woman. Birch looked at Rena, looked at the old man, looked at his 5 riders, all of them watching him to know what they were supposed to do next. He let go. Rena stepped back. She kept her eyes fixed on the man in the gray hat, and whatever she'd felt stirring in her chest a moment ago was stronger now, pulling at something deep and old, something she'd buried under years of getting on without it. This isn't settled, Birch said. I know it isn't, Silas said, but today it's settled enough. Ride on, they rode, not fast, not the way men ride when they're running. Slow and deliberate, the way men ride when they want you to. Understand that leaving was their decision and they'll be back to revisit it. Silas watched them until they were nothing but a smear of pale dust against the white sky. Then he lowered the Colt, thumbed the hammer down, and holstered it in a single motion so practiced it barely registered as movement at all. He turned to Rena. You all right? He said. Who are you? She said. He held her gaze for a long moment, long enough that she could feel the weight of what he was deciding. Then he said, My name is Silas Calloway. Rena went very still. The travel bag in her hand suddenly felt like it weighed twice what it had a moment ago. The road felt uneven beneath her boots. She listened to her own breathing, measured and careful, the breathing of someone trying not to react to something before she fully understood it. Rena, he said, I know you don't owe me a single thing. I understand that. I'm not here to collect on anything. I just needed to know you were all right. 9 years, she said. Yes, 9 years. And you just needed to know I was all right. I know how that sounds. Do you? He didn't look away. She gave him credit for that, at least. A lot of men, given what he'd done, would have studied the ground. He didn't. He held her gaze with those dark brown eyes, her father's eyes. Eyes she suddenly remembered not with her mind, but with something deeper, something that recognized before it understood. There's a spring about 2 miles south of here, he said finally. Water and shade. Somewhere to think. I'll take you there if you want. Or I'll ride on and leave you to yours. Your call. Rena looked back up the road the way Birch had gone. She looked at the flat, shimmering country ahead, the pale road running north toward Kansas. She looked at this man, this stranger. Her father, 2 miles south, she said. He nodded once, lifted his horse's reins from the mesquite branch where he'd looped them and started walking. Rena fell in beside him, close enough to talk, far enough to make clear she hadn't decided anything about what any of this was or meant or might eventually become. Now, if you've been riding along and haven't subscribed yet, do that right now. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. We've got a long trail ahead, and I don't want you missing a mile of it. The spring Silas led her to was a modest gift of the land, a trickle out of a limestone shelf into a pool about the size of a wagon bed, shaded by a stand of cottonwoods that were the most genuinely alive things in 3 miles of dry country. A man who knew this territory had found this spot, and Silas had located it on his second day past the line, which told Rena something about the quality of attention he paid to the world around him. He built a fire without ceremony, small and tight, the kind a man builds when he's been building them alone for years. He set a tin coffee pot in the coals without comment. Rena sat on a flat rock at the water's edge, pulled off her boots, and let her feet rest in the coolness. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't comfortable, but it was honest, which is sometimes more uncomfortable than comfortable silence ever manages to be. "She didn't tell me where you'd gone," Rena said finally. "Aunt Clara. She told me you'd gone away to work and that you'd come back when you were ready." Clara was being kind. Was she being kind? Or was she covering for the fact that you didn't plan to come back? He was quiet for a moment. He filled 2 tin cups and brought one to her. She took it without saying thank you, not out of spite, but because she wasn't at that place yet. "Both," he said. "I wasn't fit to raise a child. Not after your mother passed. Not carrying myself the way I was then. I told myself it was best for you." He paused, which was true. "It was also easier for me. Both those things being true at the same time doesn't make either of them less true, and I won't sit here and claim I did it purely in your interest." Rena stared into the fire. "That's more honest than I was prepared for," she said. 9 years to work out what I was going to say. Figured I might as well say the real version." She almost smiled. Almost. "What do you know about Fletcher Dunn?" she asked. "I know he's a man who likes to possess things," Silas said. "I know he's got a circuit judge in his coat pocket and the marshal's office moving in slow circles. I know he sent 6 men after you and that he'll send more. Colbert doesn't let things go. I know the kind. Do you know how to stop that kind?" Silas looked at her over his cup. In the firelight, his face was all shadow and angles, the face of an old photograph. The face she'd carried in the back of her mind since she was 7. "Never fully clear. Never fully gone. I've had some experience in that direction," he said. She studied him. She was thinking about the moment on the road when he'd drawn that Colt. She'd seen fast men before. Men who wore their speed like a decoration. Men who practiced in front of mirrors and talked about it at bar counters. Silas Calloway hadn't looked proud. He'd looked like a man picking up a hammer, straightforward, certain, like it was simply the most sensible tool for what needed doing. "Who were you?" she asked. "Before?" He turned his cup in his hands. The fire snapped once and settled. Deputy Marshal under Judge Harding out of Kansas City. "Before that, Cavalry Scout. Before that, a string of things I won't rank in order because the order isn't something I'm proud of. And the man who said put her down on that road, that was just you. That part doesn't go away," he said. She let that sit. She thought about her mother, steady and practical and kind, who had kept the household running and kept the peace, and who Rena had never once seen afraid of the man she'd married. Not because she was ignorant of what he was, but because she knew exactly what he was and had chosen him anyway, with her whole heart, and kept on choosing him. Her mother had been considerably smarter than Rena had given her credit for. "I need to reach Guthrie," Rena said. "I have a letter for the Territorial Marshal's office. It documents everything Dunn has done since 1881. Land theft, intimidation, coercion. 2 men who went missing after challenging his claims on their water rights. I spent 6 months gathering it." Silas went quiet. He was watching her with something new behind his eyes, something she couldn't immediately name. Then she named it. Respect. Plain and unperformed. Not the kind men put on when they're trying to impress. The kind that happens involuntarily when someone has done something you genuinely didn't see coming. "You built a case," he said. "I built a case." 6 months in his house, at his table, acting like a woman who noticed nothing and planned nothing. Your mother would have done exactly that, Silas said. Rena looked away at the fire. Her throat tightened. The letter's in my bag. If Birch catches up before I reach Guthrie, it's gone. And if Dunn already has the marshal's office bought and slow, maybe it doesn't matter anyway. It matters, Silas said. Paper always matters. Even when the wrong men are sitting in the right chairs, paper matters. It creates problems that can't be quietly set aside. He put down his cup. Tell me about Dunn's operation. Men, money, land. So she told him. She told him about the 8 men Birch managed directly, plus the 6 additional hands on the main spread. She told him about the 2 Osage riders Dunn had contracted who could track a trail across bare stone. She told him about the arrangement with Judge, Farrow in Fort Smith, and the understanding Dunn kept with the deputy territorial marshal in Sallow Creek, a man named Tipton who had a young family and a dread of Fletcher. Dunn that he dressed up as professional courtesy. She told him about the 2 missing men, their names, their holdings, the dates they'd last been seen, and how it had been made to look like they'd simply drifted on, which was easy enough to believe in country where men drifted on for 100 different reasons. She told him about the water rights, which was the real engine of everything. The Sallow Creek ran south through some of the finest grazing land in that stretch of territory, and whoever controlled that water decided who could run cattle and who couldn't. Dunn had been buying, threatening, and occasionally making people disappear until he controlled most of it. Silas listened to all of it without interrupting once. He had a way of listening, focused and unhurried, that said whatever you were saying was the only thing happening in the world right now. Rena had spent 8 months with a man who listened the way people look at windows, seeing mostly their own reflection. When she finished, Silas was quiet a long moment. How long before Birch rides back to Dunn? 2 hours. Maybe 3. The east camp's roughly 12 miles from where you stopped them, and then Dunn rides out himself. No, Dunn doesn't ride out. He sends more men. All of them, probably, with orders to bring me back easy if they can and not easy if they can't. He'll move tonight, or wait on morning. He thinks of himself as a patient man. Patient men get blindsided more often than the impatient ones, Silas said. They get accustomed to time doing their work for them. He looked at her steadily. I know a man named Ezra Poole, runs a stage relay about 8 miles southeast. He used to carry dispatches for Judge Harding when I was working under Harding. If he's still out there, he's got a telegraph line and a pair of draft horses we could borrow. A wire to Guthrie. And if the marshal's office there moves slow, I know a deputy out of Wichita who isn't in anyone's pocket and has no intention of being... Rena looked at him. You're going to help me. I said I would. You said you'd take me to the spring and let me decide. You didn't say a word about helping, no, he said. But here we are. She picked up her cup and drained the last of the cold coffee. And for just a moment she felt something that wasn't forgiveness and wasn't trust, but was pointing in both those directions, and the way country shifts when the light changes and things you thought you knew take on entirely different shapes. 8 miles, she said. We can make it before dark. They broke camp with a practiced efficiency born of necessity rather than ease. Silas scattered the fire and covered the coals with sand. Rena refilled the canteens at the spring. They moved mostly without speaking, the way people move when they're saving something for what's coming. Silas's horse was a stout bay gelding, 17 hands, the kind of animal a man selects when he needs something that can work hard and keep going past the point where other horses give out. He rode with the ease of someone who'd spent more of his life on horseback than off, and he kept Rena consistently to his left, between himself and the cottonwood line along the creek where cover ran thickest. She caught him scanning the country on the 2nd mile. That slow, sweeping attention, left, right, back, ahead. The habit of a man who'd spent so many years reading the land for danger that it no longer required conscious thought. He was studying the distant rimrock east. He was watching the bend where the trail curved around a dry wash. He was watching everything the way a man watches when he's learned through hard experience that watching wrong gets people killed. How many times? She asked. He looked at her. How many times have you been on the short end of the numbers like that? The way you were on that road, he thought about it. A few. What was the worst of it? 11 men, he said. Outside Cimarron in 73. 3 of us against 11. We were moving a remuda back to Fort Supply and they wanted the horses. What happened? We kept the horses. She waited for more. He didn't offer any. You're not going to tell me how, she said. It's not a story that makes for pleasant riding, he said. She let it be. She had enough of the shape of it. The shape was he knew what he was doing. The shape was he had stood against terrible odds before, and the odds had not beaten him. The relay station was still standing. Ezra Poole was still running it, a compact, white-haired man of around 60 with a handshake like a vice grip, who looked at Silas Calloway for about 4 seconds before something shifted behind his eyes in a way that confirmed to Rena these two men shared a history that needed no introduction. Silas, Poole said. Ezra, Silas said. Been a while, 9 years near enough. You've aged, so have you. Poole looked at Rena, looked at Silas, looked at the direction they'd ridden in from. Trouble, he said. It wasn't a question. A man named Fletcher Dunn out of Sallow Creek, Silas said, has the territorial circuit judge in his pocket and about 14 riders who'll be looking for this woman before morning. Poole sucked his teeth slowly. Dunn. I know that name. Heard things, he paused. How many of those riders end up here? Most likely all of them, Silas said. Depends on how sharp his tracker is. Poole looked at Rena again, then back at Silas. You've brought trouble to my door, Silas. I know it. And I'm sorry for that. But I need that telegraph line, and those 2 Percheron mares, and whatever help you can spare. Poole was quiet long enough that the wind moving through the cottonwoods around the station sounded like water running over smooth rock. You'll get the wire, he said finally, and the mares, and I've got 2 sons who know which end of a rifle to point at a problem. I'm obliged, Silas said. Don't be obliged, Poole said. Just make sure they don't burn the place down. They sent 2 wires, one to the marshal's office in Guthrie, one to a deputy in Wichita named Tom Aldwell, a man Silas had ridden alongside in the old Kansas City days. Rena sat at the main table in the relay station and wrote out a clean summary of her letter, the most factual and precise version she could render. Names and dates and figures, the 2 vanished men, the water rights, the judge and the compromised marshal's deputy in Sallow Creek. Silas read it over her shoulder and didn't suggest a single change. It's good, he said. I know it is, she said. He almost smiled. Get some sleep, he said. I'll take first watch. You need rest, too. I'll take first watch, he said again. She looked at him. I slept on the ride over, he said, which was plainly untrue, delivered with a completely straight face. And he knew she knew it, and she knew he knew she knew it. And somehow that transparent lie was the most recognizable thing about him, the most like the faint early memory of a man who couldn't stop working even when the work was done. She slept. She dreamed of the road, of the 6 horses in their arc, of the man in the gray hat stepping out of the Shimmer, and in the dream she knew immediately who he was, the way you know things in dreams, with your whole body before your mind catches up. She came awake at 2 a.m. to the sound of horses, not 1 or 2, many, moving slowly in the dark, with the careful deliberateness of men who want to arrive unannounced. She was on her feet with her boots on before she'd fully surfaced from sleep. She found Silas already in the doorway, Colt in hand, watching the dark country to the north. How many? She said quietly. 12, I think. Maybe 13. Left 2 back on the road. He didn't turn. Poole's sons are in the barn loft. Poole himself is in the grain store with his rifle. I need you in the back room with the door barred. No! He looked at her then. Silas. She said it without weight. Just the name. This is my fight. Dunn is here for me. What do you need me to do? A long beat of silence. Do you know how to shoot? My mother taught me, she said. She used to say it was a practical skill for women who made the kinds of choices she made. He reached into his coat pocket and brought out a short-barreled revolver. Loaded. 5 rounds. He pressed it into her hands with the same plain certainty he did everything. Not tender, not rough. Just sure water trough, he said. 12 feet left of the door.
You stay behind it.
Nobody comes through that entrance. And if you have to shoot, horses first, not riders. Horse goes down, men slow down. Horses first, she said. First choice. If a man brings a rifle up on you, you don't have to wait. I know, she said. The night outside the relay station had gone perfectly still. The kind of stillness that happens when the small things, insects, night birds, everything small and cautious, sense something large and dangerous and stop whatever they're doing. The stars were out hard and clear. The moon was 3/4 full, enough to shoot by, enough to be shot at by, which put everyone on the same footing. Cole Birch's voice came out of the darkness from about 40 yards north. "We know you're in there, Silas Calloway." The name landed with weight Birch hadn't intended it to carry. He'd said it like a winning card, like knowing the name was the same as holding the advantage. What it actually was a declaration that he'd ridden 12 miles in the dark to tell a man that he knew who he was. Silas said nothing. "There's 12 of us out here," Birch said. "You've got what? 2 old men and a woman? Send her out and everyone rides home clean." Still nothing from Silas Calloway. "Last chance," Birch said, and now the patience in his voice had thinned, and what was underneath it was beginning to show. "We'll put fire to the station. Think hard before you do that," Silas said. His voice carried easily in the clear night, calm, unhurried, as though this conversation was only mildly interesting to him. "A man named Aldwell out of Wichita received a wire tonight. He's riding with 6 deputies and he'll be here by mid-morning. You torch this station, that's arson on territorial land. And Aldwell doesn't take a Fort Smith judge's word for much of anything." Silence from the dark. "I've also got paper," Silas continued. "Names and dates and dollar figures. 2 men who vanished after arguing with Fletcher Dunn over water rights." "Cole, I'd think very carefully about what you do in the next 10 minutes because every choice you make out there goes into that paper." More silence. Then movement, the creak of leather, the low, urgent murmur of men arguing quietly in the dark. Horses shifting. Rena, crouched behind the water trough with the revolver steady in both hands, felt the exact moment the weight of things shifted. She'd spent 8 months living with a man who believed power was something you held over other people. What she'd learned, slowly and at real cost, was that the only power that held was the kind that came from knowing more than the other person believed you knew, and being prepared to use it without flinching. Silas Calloway had just used it. One rider peeled away from the back of Birch's group and pushed north at speed, heading for Sallow Creek. Then another. Then 3 more. When Birch spoke again, his voice was quieter. "This isn't finished, Calloway. I know it isn't," Silas said. "But tonight it is. Ride on, Cole!" A long silence, then the sound of horses turning. The slow, deliberate sound of men riding away, not running, still making the statement with their pace that this was a choice and not a retreat. 5 men had broken north. 8 were moving east. That left Birch somewhere in the dark with 4 or 5 at most. "Pool," Silas called. "Here," came the voice from the grain store. "Keep watching east." They may circle, watching. Rena stood up slowly from behind the trough. Her knees ached. Her hands were steady. She looked at Silas, who stood in the doorway precisely as he'd stood before any of it began, as though 12 men in the surrounding dark had been no particular disruption to his constitution. "You told them Aldwell was coming," she said. "Yes. Is he actually coming?" "Depends on when the wire reached him." "He'll come. Maybe not by morning, so part of it was a bluff. Part of it," he said. He holstered the Colt. The part about the paper wasn't. That was true. He looked at her steadily. "You stayed behind the trough. You told me to." "A good many people don't do what you tell them when there are rifles pointed at the building." "I did what made sense," she said. "Yes," he said. "You did." They held watch through the rest of the night in shifts, listening to the country settle back into its nighttime rhythms. Poole's sons were solid men, quiet and unhurried in the way of people raised in hard country who understand that panic is a luxury you can't afford and can't take back. Dawn came gradually. The sky moved from black to deep purple to ash gray, and with the light came Tom Aldwell. He rode in from the north at 6 with 5 deputies and a territorial warrant signed by a judge in Guthrie who was not in Fletcher Dunn's pocket and had no plans to be. He was a compact man with a graying beard and the deliberate manner of someone who had been doing this long enough to have stopped being surprised by most of what people were capable of. He knew Silas Calloway. He shook his hand. He looked at Rena, He took her letter and read it, standing in the yard in the early light while his horse stood behind him in the cottonwoods dripping dew. He read it a second time. 2 missing men, he said. Names, dates, and last known locations for both, Rena said. A man named Corvin who had water rights south of Sallow Creek, and a man named Harp who had a small holding along the same creek. Both went missing within 3 weeks of formally disputing Dunn's claim on the water. That's a serious allegation, I know it is. I spent 6 months being careful about what went into that letter. Aldwell folded it and tucked it inside his coat. He looked at Silas. Birch and the rest rode east last night, back toward Dunn's main spread. They'll be there by now, then that's where we go. He looked at Rena. You'll need to come. Your testimony matters. If Dunn has Judge Farrow managed, it'll take the Guthrie court to untangle it, and they'll want to hear from you directly. I know, Rena said. I'm ready. They rode out at 7. All of them, Poole and his sons included. Poole on a mule with his rifle across the saddle, and the expression of a man who had privately decided how this was going to end and made his peace with it. Rena rode between Silas and Aldwell. She had the revolver Silas had given her in her coat pocket, though she didn't think she'd need it. What she expected was law. Actual law with paper and authority behind it, the kind she'd spent 6 months building a case to reach. Fletcher Dunn was on the porch of his main house when they rode into the yard. He came out wearing the fine coat he put on when he wanted to remind people of the gap between his money and theirs. He saw Aldwell's badge first, and that made his eyes go careful. He saw the 5 deputies. That made them go more careful still. Then he saw Rena riding straight-backed with her chin level, and whatever he'd been preparing to say dissolved somewhere between his chest and his mouth. Then he saw Silas Calloway. He knew the face. Rena watched the exact moment recognition hit him. Watched the calculation drain out of his eyes and something else replace it. Something she had never once seen in Fletcher Dunn's face in 8 months of close observation. Not fear, exactly. Fear was too clean a word for it. It was more like the expression of a man who has just looked at a map and realized he is standing somewhere he never intended to stand. With no good path out, Aldwell read from the warrant. Cole Birch came out of the barn and stopped dead when he saw what was assembled in the yard. The other riders around the property did the slow, deliberate arithmetic that men do when they're counting what's in front of them and finding the total is not in their favor. Dunn tried words first. He always led with words. He was accomplished with them, skilled at reframing events, at making what he'd done sound like something someone else had started. Aldwell let him go for about 90 seconds, then raised one hand. I've got 2 names here, Aldwell said. Corvin and Harp. You want to handle this on the porch, or do you want to ride quiet? Dunn rode quiet. He rode quiet because what was in that letter was enough. Because the 2 deputies Aldwell had dispatched to Fort Smith 3 hours earlier with a copy of the warrant were going to be a problem for Judge Farrow that no arrangement could make disappear cleanly. He rode quiet because Silas Calloway was standing in that yard watching him with flat, certain eyes that had seen men try the other option and reflected it. Cole Birch was arrested. 2 other riders whose names appeared in Rena's documentation were arrested alongside him. The rest of the morning was sorting and paperwork. Most of the afternoon, too. By the time Aldwell's party rode north with their prisoners toward Guthrie, the sun was dropping and painting the flats in copper and amber, the long September light of the territory, wide and quiet and indifferent to all of it. Rena stood on the porch of Dunn's main house, which was going to require lawyers to properly sort out, but which was no longer Fletcher Dunn's in any way that counted, and watched the dust of Aldwell's party settle on the northern horizon. Silas stood a few feet away, leaning on the porch rail, hat in his hands, turning it slowly the way he did when he was working on something he didn't know how to say. The 2 Osage trackers Dunn had employed had ridden south at sunrise and not returned, which Aldwell said was fine and Silas agreed with. Some problems unspool themselves when the tension holding them together goes slack. Poole's heading back tonight, Silas said. I know. I thanked him. He said you were welcome. He's a good man. Yes, Silas said. He is. The quiet between them stretched out. The sky shifted from amber to the deep bruised purple of a territory evening, and the first stars came out sharp and steady over the flat country. I'm going to Guthrie, Rena said. I need to be there for the proceedings. Aldwell said it might take a month. Possibly 6 weeks. I know, after that, she paused. After that, I don't know yet. I'm 22 years old and I don't own anything, and I haven't had a single thing that was truly mine in 8 months. So I don't know yet. That's fair. I'm not telling you I forgive you, she said. What I'm telling you is that I'm not forgiving you. I'm telling you there's something here that I don't have a word for, and I'm not going to try to name it tonight. Silas Calloway looked out at the darkening country, the first nighthawks cutting through the dusk over the grassland, the far lights of Sallow Creek beginning to glow on the southern edge of the world. That's more than I had any right to expect, he said. And he meant it. She could hear that he meant it, the way you can hear the difference between a man saying something real and a man saying something he's decided he ought to say. Guthrie's a long ride, she said. 100 miles, give or take. Aldwell and his men are going straight through. You could come as far as Guthrie, she said, if you wanted. I'm not asking you to stay beyond that. I'm not making any promises about what comes after. But you could ride as far as Guthrie. He was quiet a long moment. He looked at the hat still turning in his hands. Then he set it on his head and looked at her. All right, he said. All right, she said. They rode out at first light, southeast toward Guthrie, the territory waking up around them, hawks lifting off the flats, the light coming up pink and gold over the rim of the world. They didn't talk much in that first hour. Didn't need to. There was something that passed between them in the simple fact of riding the same direction at the same pace, and it was too new and too fragile to risk putting language around. Rena was wise enough to know that. What she knew, the way you know things once you've been through something hard enough to strip away everything that isn't essential, was this. A woman who builds a 6-month case with her own hands while living inside the house of the man she's building it against is not a woman who needed rescuing. What she needed, what she had never had, was someone at her back who could do the one thing she couldn't do herself, and what she couldn't do herself was step out of the heat shimmer and face 6 armed riders and say, put her down in a voice that made it happen. Her father could do that. That was something. It wasn't everything. It wasn't close to everything. And she held that distinction clearly, the way you hold on to true things when sentiment is pressing you towards something easier and less accurate. He'd been gone 9 years. He'd made a choice that had left her alone in the world. And choices like that don't dissolve overnight just because the man who made them turns out to still know how to point a gun. But he'd ridden 11 days to find her. And on that road in the midday heat, standing alone against 6 men with rifles, he'd said 4 words and meant every one of them from somewhere below. Reasoning the territory stretched ahead of them, wide and golden and already beginning to heat up. The kind of day that makes promises it may or may not. Honor. Aldwell's dust was visible on the horizon ahead, moving south. They caught up to it before noon. In the proceedings at Guthrie, Fletcher Dunn answered for what he'd done to his neighbors and what he'd attempted to do to the woman who'd spent 6 months quietly documenting it all. The 2 missing men, Corvin and Harp, had their names entered into a court record, which was not justice, but was at least acknowledgement, which was more than they'd had before. Judge Farrow in Fort Smith had a difficult conversation with the Guthrie court about certain arrangements a sitting judge is not permitted to make. Deputy Marshal Tipton in Sallow Creek, the man with the young family and the expensive fears, resigned his post before the month was out. Rena heard later he went back east to sell agricultural equipment. She hoped he slept better there. Tom Aldwell received a commendation from the territorial governor, which he put in a drawer and didn't bring up again. Ezra Poole told the story at his relay station for the next 20 years, and it got a little longer with each telling, though the core of it never changed. Silas Calloway had walked out of the heat shimmer and said 4 words, and after that the counting was done. Silas stayed for the first 2 weeks in Guthrie. Then one morning across the breakfast table at the rooming house where they'd taken separate rooms, he looked at her and said he thought he might ride west for a stretch. If she was squared away, I'm squared away. She said, I'll write, he said. If you do, she said, I'll write back. He tipped his hat. He went west. He wrote from New Mexico territory, then from Colorado. Short letters, factual, careful, containing in their careful way more than men like Silas Calloway usually managed to put into letters. She wrote back what passed between them across those letters over the years that followed. Wasn't reconciliation, not exactly, not all at once, but it moved in that direction steadily. And that, in the end, was about as much as two people broken by different things and shaped by different losses could honestly build toward. Somewhere out there, in the wide and weathered country along the Kansas Indian Territory line, that trail still runs between the chaparral and the dry flats. The mesquite is still there, the heat still rises off the creek clay in July, and somewhere in the thinning air of that old country, the echo of a man's voice carrying 4 words across the white afternoon still lives, the way only the things spoken without hesitation and meant from the bone survive. Put her down, boys, and they did. If this story moved you even a little, leave a like and subscribe to this channel. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Tell me which story you'd like to hear next. We've got more of these old trails to ride. More names worth remembering. More moments where the quiet man stepping out of the dust turns out to be the one thing standing between cruelty and consequence. Until our trails cross again, keep your word. And keep your powder dry. This is a work of fiction. Names, places, and events are the product of imagination. Any resemblance to real persons or historical events is coincidental. These stories are crafted to entertain and to honor the spirit of the American frontier.